This is 01:48 Hrs GMT in the morning of Friday, the 7th of August 2020. This picture taken sometime in 2010 was supposedly taken of a group of supposed opponents of the call for a referendum to have an executive mayor in Tower Hamlets. So this picture actually contains the photo of a person who later became a staunch supporter of the mayor system and is very centrally involved in the formal structure of the party that is linked to Lutfur Rahman. And this picture also contains other people, all of whom subsequently became supporters of the mayor system. So the picture is 10 years old at least. Now, the report, the previous report, previous to this one, began covering the details of the corruption of Newham Council under Robin Wales and under his successor, who is now in post, Roxana Fias. We shall continue that report exclusively in this second part. Just a quick look, glimpse of the fronts, the Fleet Street front pages perpetrating an effrontery of carrying further lies for Boris Johnson. This is the Daily Express. This is part of the Daily Express of Friday, the 7th of August 2020. This is part of the front page which is celebrating the muscular, almost Superman physique of the British incumbent as Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is not Superman and is not fit, but that's what the Daily Express is doing. In the Daily Mail says that the British Home Secretary Priti Patel is sending in the Navy to tackle the migrant crisis. Now, this is actually literally the front page of the Daily Mail of Friday. Can you believe that? Priti Patel is sending the Navy to tackle the migrant crisis. The migrants are being treated as a military invasion force. Otherwise, there would have been a civilian action taken to address any issues raised by the pandemonium of a government that is failing to serve the community and the country during the pandemic. And the Daily Mirror is the only one that is actually not running a pro-Boris Johnson or pro-racist, anti-migrant or anti-immigrant front page. It's the spectre of Boris Johnson real controller, who is Dominic Cummings. Apparently there has been another call to investigate Dominic Cummings' second lockdown breach. This is not going to be anything other than another tokenistic kind of spin, but that is the fact that the Daily Mirror is the only one of the Fleet Street papers that is not running a propaganda for Boris Johnson. The Guardian front page is full of prevarication, and the Metro, which is not a real Fleet Street paper but a daily outlet, which is continuing to run the splash on its front page based on Caroline Flack's mother's fury, this time her mother's fury at the police for their claimed involvement in the release of photographs that showed Caroline Flack in a desperately compromised, violent, controversial position, which her supporters and her mother, of course, are contesting and will continue to contest. But the significant thing is that in the front page of the Metro or of the Guardian, there are no real emphatic opposition to the Boris Johnson mishandling of the pandemic. And doctors are warning, do not halt normal NHS care again to tackle COVID-19. This is again undermining the emergency, the importance of having to treat the pandemic seriously. These are the headlines of the Boris Graph, which is the Telegraph, which has been hiring Boris Johnson at a pretext of his writing a column, allegedly 50 columns a year, for which he has been paid millions of pounds in the last decade by the owners of the Daily Boris Graph. They effectively bought him, or a share in Boris Johnson. They bought a share in Boris Johnson. And the Times is talking about the quarantine dispute with the French, the quarantine dispute by the British with the French. And this is the Express, the full headline, which is showing Boris Johnson as the Superman, and also the Economy is showing signs of strength. So the Telegraph and the Express we have put together or next to one another to show that they are promoting Boris Johnson as the Superman, as well as the economy under Boris Johnson as being doing super well, and is on the way back to whatever the normal strength of the British economy is supposed to have been before the pandemic hit it. Now back to the crane crash in the Bow E3 area caused by the Tower Hamlets Council failing to require the Swan housing degenerators to ensure that they were using installations and structures that were safe and not a threat to people's safety. Now, this is the statement published belatedly by the East London Idiotizer in its edition dated the last Thursday, 30th of July. And this edition, the front page is of course about the toddler that was thrown or fell from the top 7th or 8th floor on the East India Dock Road, a building in Popline near the All Saints Church and the All Saints DLR station last month. And on page 2, people don't want things to return to how they were, project finding. And on page 5, there is a statement which is carried in 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs, short paragraphs on page 5. And it is headed Investigation Needed into Crane Tragedy. Now, this is the statement supposedly issued in the name of Afsana Begum, who is the newest elected MP for the constituency that covers the area where the crane collapse happened. It was not a tragedy. We call it negligent killing or negligent death, negligence of the Travelers Council and Swan Housing and the crane company and others involved. All of them behaved negligently. And the fact that Travelers Council features on the front page of this edition of the freely distributed East London Idiotizer shows the persistence of failures by Travelers Council as a regulation or regulating authority about building safety. Now that was, of course, the 30th of July, which was a few days before Travelers Council was forced to concede that it would plead guilty to the negligent killing of the 5-year-old child in the playground in the Myland Park on the 17th of July 2015 because of the rotting timber being in the structure of the swing that she was playing on. And it fell on her and it killed her in front of her mother. Now, these are the 3 items of one single council lethally failing to safeguard people's safety and safeguard the child's safety, safeguard the elderly person, June Harvey's safety in the course of less than 4 years. And of course, the building from which this toddler fell or was thrown in Poplar in East India Dock Road earlier last month was also open to serious charges of unsafe structure, unsafe in the sense that the windows were too big and any toddler of that size could, not that this particular toddler did, but any toddler, any child, any infant could actually climb out of the window. It was that spacious and it was not protected. Something that should have been obvious to any observers. Most importantly, those employed in the Travelers Council building safety so-called posts. So there are 4 incidents we are looking at of one single East London Council. Factual, these are not opinions. Factually, we are saying that they are involved. And not only are we saying factually, legally, the death by negligence of the 5-year-old child Alexis in the playground in Myland Park on the 17th of July 2015 is an admission, public admission by the current incumbent in the post of executive mayor in Tower Hamlets, John Biggs. He said to the so-called local democracy reporter, Rachel Barford, who filed byline copies both for the evening No Standard and the enchanted East London Idiotizer, that they were going to, that is Tower Hamlets Council, were going to plead guilty to the charge or charges brought against it by the Health and Safety Executive. At the hearing scheduled later, scheduled for October, I think, hearing in this year. But it is possible that the hearing may not be necessary or be averted or avoided because, as I said previously, the fact that any hearing could take place automatically involved the demand by the prosecutors, or the ideal demand by the prosecutors, for the defendant, that is the Hrs Council, to disclose all the evidence of the behavior and the conduct of the particular decision makers and personnel in place at the time that the child Alexis died. Alexia died in July 2015 in Mylan Park. And Hrs Council has got a record history of trying to evade and avoid disclosure, as happened to the Mark Edmonds saga. It took almost a year before it released heavily redacted documents relating to the criminal regime that was operated for years under the banner of the Children or Youth Service in Tower Hamlets. And the redacted documents, despite the redacted state, still contain enough revelations of the widespread criminality that was operated under the banner of Youth Service in Tower Hamlets Council. And we have said previously, that that service was supposed to have actually abused its remit in relation to the safeguarding children, and also shifted at least £2 million that was given to it as a grant by the UK Home Office under the agenda or narrative of reducing or tackling radicalism or radicalization of children in Tower Hamlets under the program called Prevent. Now, all of that has been public knowledge now, and yet none of the elected councillors and none of the MPs has made any comment about any of those criminality, wrongdoing by the supposedly legally in existence, legally funded, publicly funded local authority. So the Afsana Begum statement, published on page 5 of the East London Idiotizer about the bow crane negligent crash, does not say anything about the liabilities of the Tower Hamlets Council, nor about the complicity of the council with the corrupt Swan housing degenerators who have had a record, more than 10 years long record, of trying to corruptly degenerate the area under the guise of creating homes and housing. Afsana Begum makes the most empty statement, whoever wrote it. She could not have written it on her own, because her record of writing is known to us. Because when she was employed in a junior capacity during Lutfur Rahman being in post as the executive mayor, her emails were composed in language that is less compact than this statement that has been issued in her name and carried in the East London Idiotizer, page 5, the dated the 30th of July 2020, that is last week, a week ago. And Afsana Begum's preparedness to allow a statement of such deep emptiness shows that only because somebody is an MP or elected MP, incumbent MP from a constituency in a borough does not mean that that MP will be telling the truth about the liabilities and the failures and the corruption and the criminality and the dysfunctionality of the borough council administration in that borough, the borough that actually covers and contains that particular MP's constituency, which takes us back to Newham. And Newham's two MPs, Lynn Brown and Stephen Timms, are known to accommodate the administration in place at the time in Newham Council, no matter who the mayor is. There is no record in the last 16 years of the sitting MPs, whether it was Lynn Brown or whether her predecessor, whoever the MP was for West Ham, or Stephen Timms, who has been continuously MP for East Ham throughout the last 16 years, or in fact 18 years, of making or seeking to make or seeking to or be prepared to be seen to be supporting any call, independent, objective, overdue call and demand for accountability to the community, to the individuals affected by the wrongdoings, incompetence, lack of care, cruelty, lack of compassion, lack of accountability, transparency by the regime generally, or by the particular service unit or personnel making the decisions, denying the people, the individuals, the families, the other groups, the services that they were owed, and the services under which Newham Council, as any other local council, seeks and receives hundreds of millions of pounds of public money from the two sources. One is the council tax, and the other is the central government grant, which is part of the arrangement or the settlement. And this grant is issued not only by the Ministry of Housing, which used to be the communities and local government, it is now the Ministry of Housing and Local Government and Communities or whatever. These grants are never accounted for to the public. These grants are never explained in terms of where they are spent and what difference they made to the particular actual delivery of the service for which these grants were made made by the central government and received by the given council. And the Newham Council, as I have said in the first edition of this series of reports, world exclusive reports, launched in the afternoon of Thursday, 6th of August 2020, Newham Council is the only council of any significant mention that is the one-party council, which means that there is less room for elected councillors making any demands against their own council than there would be if there were elected councillors that had been representing other parties, no matter how small the other parties were. So the Newham Council has been for decades a one-party, Labour Party state, local council beyond corruption allegation, beyond corruption investigation, beyond accountability. And this is despite the fact that the Tories, as the right-wing opposition to the what they call the Red Newham Council, tried several times to upset the one-party status or one-party environment in Newham. Julian Lewis, who is now the elected chair of the Intelligence Committee, whatever, Julian Lewis has been a known campaigner for right-wing causes, and he intervened in Newham, tried to upset the status quo of a single-party state, and he failed. And his predecessor, the Labour Party MP, that was in place before Stephen Timms came into being as the MP also failed. And that MP, the Labour Party MP, defected to the Tories, and it made no difference. And that takes us to the operation of the so-called Labour Party, membership party. What is it about and how is it run or not run? And there is no evidence that the Labour Party branches that actually formally rubber stamp or choose the series or serial councillors candidates and the mayor candidate now have actually demanded accountability. Accountability as owed independently to the electorate and the electors. Accountability that is objectively owed. So there is no accountability demand. And although there are meetings, regular meetings held of the Labour Party branches, these meetings are plastic events. There is no real concern for accountability. There is no concern for the quality of society or the local economy, the local housing, the local environment, nothing. That is why the people in Newham who are not members of the Labour Party and people in Newham who are not inclined to be members of the Labour Party or do not have the opportunity or the option to join the Labour Party uh, are unable to express any opinion that makes any difference to the quality of service they don't receive or do receive or whatever. So there is a void, there is a series of void that is operating in Newham, and the result is that whoever is in the leader's position or in the elected position is exempt, given impunity, de facto impunity from accountability to the local electors and the electorate. And so therefore there is no chain of accountability in Newham Council that any person seeking accountability and answers can actually contact and get engaged with. For example, local councils have in place a post called the monitoring officer. Most of the councils have the chief legal officer, in-house legal officer as the monitoring officer. Some don't have that, but that is the general standard. And the reason is that the monitoring officer would comply with the existing legal obligations that the council must discharge. And the legal obligations must be discharged independently, objectively, not in a partisan or opportunistic or careerist way. In Newham, the fact is that the evidence is, the record is that there is no evidence that the monitoring officer has been causing any problem for the incumbent in post of the mayor on account of Newham Council being a one party, unaccountable, corrupt dictatorship. And the Private Eye magazine published, I'm looking for it, Private Eye magazine published an item about the monitoring officer in place in Newham, who is currently in place, and he is called Daniel Fenwick. Now, Daniel Fenwick has a history of controversial featuring in events and news, and Private Eye does not describe it elaborately, in detail, but suggests that the fact that Daniel Fanwick is in post as the monitoring officer, that will have a decisive and significant impact against Roxana Fayaz trying to tell the truth. And that has happened. And the details we shall cover in the articles that we shall post on Twitter and on Facebook. Actual image of the page of the Private Eye article, not current issue Private Eye, but an issue last year. And this is only a symptomatic representative, typical example of the coverage when it is done about the role of Daniel Fanwick, who has been a reasonably long-standing careerist in place in local councils. And Private Eye's view in the Rotten Boroughs was that the fact that Roxana has had him in post would have an impact against any even token transparency that she was previously reported to have been promising. And so therefore what we have got in Newham is that whatever the illegality, the wrongdoing, the lack of compliance with the legal duties, there is nobody, there is no part of the Newham Council that can hold the rest of the council accountable in accordance with the council's legal duties. Even the monitoring officer is seen as part of the problem of denying transparency, accountability, and truthfulness to the community, to the electors, and to the public. And yet, neither the Conservative Party nor the smaller parties like the Greens, the Lib Dems, and any other small party, they have not made any inroads into this citadel of corruption and criminality that is Newham Council. How come? How is that possible? And we shall come to that in later parts of this series of investigation, because explaining these things is not based on anything that has been published. We are creating this commentary. I am speaking it, but I'm speaking the evidence that I have collected or I've been forced to collect over the long time, various stages of investigation I've been carrying out into Newham Council as part of my investigation over the last nearly 50 years. And the Newham Council is persistently one of the worst performing local councils. Now, the fact that the mayor in Luton, an Asian mayor, a Muslim mayor, has been forced to resign because he violated the face mask wearing and lockdown restrictions is to be seen in contrast to both Newham, because nobody in Newham ever resigns, no matter what their councils or their personnel role, how bad that is. And also that Luton mayor's resignation has to be compared with the defiant stay in post of Dominic Cummings, as has been recognized in Friday's front page of the Daily Mirror, because the Mirror reports that there is a new call for investigation into Dominic Cummings. Watchdog is called on to probe Cummings' second lockdown breach or something. The full headline is not visible, but that is what it is. It's the second lockdown. And this is the Daily Mirror of Friday. Later today, it can be seen in full. So Cummings defiant, and also Boris Johnson's family, his father is defiant because his father has been breaking the lockdown right, left, and center, including flying to Greece with an apparently teenaged looking young female conservative diehard operative. These are people that have been exempted, given immunity or impunity from accountability. And that is the same lack of morality that is attached to Boris Johnson's behavior, even by the so-called former communist David Aranovich, writing in Thursday's Times a column about the hiring or elevating to the House of Peers of the likes of Claire Fox. Now, David Aranovich, like Galloway, has been a staunch supporter of the right-wing agenda in this country that the conservatives have pursued. Aranovich has the excuse of being identifiable as a former communist. Now, when he was in the National Union of Students as a secretary, following Sue Slupman and Trevor Terrible Phillips in that post, Aranovich was colluding with right-wing agenda and measures. So although he was a communist, he was not following an anti-capitalist agenda in the government's behavior in those days. And also Aranovich is a sworn enemy of George Galloway. Amazing. Both of them are staunch left-wingers or arch ex-left-wingers. And both of them have been supportive of the right-wing narrative of demonizing the general democratic campaigners. In the case of Galloway, he has not named Corbyn as his target, but Galloway has played a role as a colluder, propaganda asset with the Brexiteering right that have demonized the left and that demonized Corbyn. And Galloway has used the technique of attacking Corbyn's supporters, some supporters, rather than naming Corbyn as his target. But now, in the case of Scotland, Galloway has come completely apart. He is now saying that he will work with the Conservatives against the SNP to stop Sturgeon and the SNP's re-election at the election that is due in Scotland. And the nationalist newspaper, the Scottish National newspaper, has actually published a summary of Galloway's various about turns and false threats and promises and whatever. And we have published exclusively the longest running series of articles, factual, investigative, about George Galloway's career as a person who grabs the detour opportunity. Wherever there is an opportunity, he grabs it in terms of election and in terms of enhancing his, quote, political radical agenda, full stop. There is no radicalism in the record of Galloway's behavior in the House of Commons, except in the rhetoric that he used. But when it came to actually following the agenda to upset the status quo, he has not supported any of the radical campaigners out in the community, in the constituencies. We shall not dwell at this stage on the details of George Galloway's role, except to say that George Galloway made a claim in 2014 that he claimed that he was the one who enabled a Bengali to become an MP for Bethnal Green and Bow. Now that is as outrageous as Galloway's claims against Naz Shah in Bradford and other people of Pakistani Muslim backgrounds in Bradford. When Galloway saw that his prospect of getting re-elected were not very bright, he launched on a series of desperate personal attacks on local Asian, mainly Pakistani origin, Labour Party activists and members, including Nawaz Shah, of course. And so therefore, George Galloway being still touted, and in fact he's being touted more as a prominent ex-MP by the right wing, Nigel Farage, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, Boris Johnson wing of politics in the West than he ever was when he was in post and not in open collusion with the right wing activists or incumbents. And George Galloway's use or usefulness can be compared easily, safely on the evidence as a useful idiot that can be described as aligned with the left and as aligned with Moscow. George Galloway's largest number of high-profile quotes are taken from his deliberations via the Russian television RT. Now, it is not a secret. RT is Russian state television. Yet George Galloway is not only being favorably quoted through the RT when he attacks the Labour Party or the ideas of socialism or societal or socialism, slightly socially caring agenda in this country. And when he attacks the Scottish nationalists or Scottish National Party. So this is absolutely the perfect fit as an right-wing agendas, useful ex-left-wing idiot. And the references to Galloway's failed political stunts include, of course, his appearance in January 2006 on the Big Brother house, where he impersonated a cat, and he did all kinds of embarrassing scenes on camera for the benefit of the program. And Rula Lenska was the other one that he actually took part in that program with. So what time is it now? This is the 02:31 hours GMT. We shall end this particular broadcast and we shall resume a little while later, and we shall start part 3 of the investigative report, exclusive report into the corruption, criminality, and lack of democracy in Newham Council as fronted by the elected mayor, Ruxana Fiaz, who is continuing the corruption, criminality, lack of democracy, accountability that had been perpetrated and perpetuated by Robin Wales for 18 years as leader and as the incumbent for 16 years as the elected mayor in the name of Newham people and Newham electors.